It is 2 in the morning in the Nevada desert, and the ground is shaking before the train arrives. The crew stands clear, the track hums, and then it comes. Not the familiar diesel growl that defines every freight corridor in America, but something closer to a sustained roar, a sound that belongs at an airport, not a rail yard. The locomotive that produces it is enormous. Its exhaust stacks throw heat shimmer into the cold desert air. The power it carries is not theoretical. It is immediate, physical, and overwhelming. The obvious assumption writes itself. More powerful machine, better technology, longer future. That is how progress works. But this machine is already dead. It has been dead for decades, and it was not killed by a better design, a faster competitor, or a mechanical failure. It was killed by a number on a spreadsheet. The most powerful locomotive ever built in America was lost, not to engineering. It was lost to accounting. Here is the mental model almost everyone carries about freight locomotives. Diesel won because diesel is better. Diesel is everywhere. Every track in North America runs on it, so it must have earned that position through superior performance. That assumption is so complete it rarely gets questioned. Diesel did not just win, it feels inevitable, like it was always going to win. But that framing hides something important. Diesel did not beat a competitor on merit. A competitor simply became too expensive to feed. Those are very different stories. The machine in question is the Union Pacific gas turbine electric locomotive. The crews called them big blows, and once heard, the name makes complete sense. These were not diesel engines. They were not steam. They were jet engines bolted to freight cars, the same combustion principle that drives a commercial airliner, scaled up and mounted on steel wheels. The mechanism is direct. Air enters the turbine at one end. It gets compressed, mixed with fuel, ignited. The expanding gases spin a shaft at extreme speed. That shaft drives electric traction motors at the wheels. No pistons, no cylinders, just continuous rotational force, as clean in principle as anything in transportation. The output was 8,500 horsepower per unit. To understand what that number means, no diesel locomotive built before or since has matched it. The big blows did not compete at the top of the power chart. They rewrote it entirely. And here is the twist that makes the whole story strange. The fuel that gave them that power was the cheapest liquid available in the American energy economy, residual fuel oil, the sludge, the thick, heavy byproduct left at the bottom of the refinery process after every useful product has been extracted, the same bunker fuel that ocean cargo ships burn in their massive, slow-turning engines. Nobody else wanted it in large quantities. It was practically waste. Union Pacific burned it by the tanker load, and the economics looked almost absurd. The turbines were more powerful than anything else on the rails, and they ran on the industrial equivalent of leftovers. That combination seemed bulletproof. Raw power, negligible fuel cost, routes no diesel could match in a single pull. Union Pacific did not use these as novelty machines. They ran them on their hardest assignments, long, heavy hauls across mountain grades, where diesel locomotives would have required multiple units, multiple crew rotations, significant added cost. The turbines handled those grades in a single consist. On the routes they were designed for, they were not just competitive, they were dominant. The operators who ran them knew this. And this is where the story gets strange in a human sense, not just an engineering one. When fuel costs started to climb, the engineers and crews pushed back against retirement. Their position was technically correct. On a per-ton per mile basis, on the specific heavy-haul mountain routes where the turbines operated, the performance argument still held. The machines still outperformed diesels on exactly the tasks they were built for. Management retired them anyway, not because the performance case was wrong, because the cost trajectory was irreversible. The operators were right about the machine. The accountants were right about the math. Both were simultaneously correct, and the machine still lost. The moment that made the decision obvious, even if the timing predated it, was the 1973 oil shock. Residual fuel oil had been cheap because it was unwanted. When the broader energy market convulsed, that changed. The price of residual oil tripled in a compression that measured in months, not years. The fuel that had been the turbine's advantage became a liability at a speed that no mechanical redesign could outrun. Here is the gut punch buried in that timeline. Union Pacific had already retired the last gas turbine electric locomotive in 1970, 3 years before the full shock hit. The decision was not reactive, it was preemptive. The railroad had read the fuel market trajectory early enough to move ahead of the collapse. The big blows were still running well on their final day of service. No mechanical failure, no replacement technology. The fleet was simply stood down while it was still operational because the accounting made continuation impossible. One unit survived. It sits today at the Utah State Railroad Museum, the only physical proof that this technology existed at the scale Union Pacific deployed it. A machine that should, by any engineering logic, still have descendants on the main line. Parked, preserved, inert. This is the detail worth sitting with when looking at any modern freight locomotive. Every diesel on the rails today carries an invisible ceiling, a horsepower limit that traces not to physics, not to engineering constraint, but to the absence of the machine that got retired. Diesel did not earn the top of the power chart. The top of the power chart was vacated and diesel filled it. That is a fundamentally different kind of dominance. Gas turbines did not disappear from transportation. They are everywhere, inside every commercial aircraft, inside naval destroyers, inside power generation facilities. The technology is not fragile or obsolete. It works at scales and efficiencies that diesel cannot approach. The problem that killed the big blows was never the turbine itself. It was the dependency on a single commodity fuel in a market with no floor. Tie your economics to the cheapest thing available, and you have built a clock that runs perfectly until the price of cheap changes. Modern engineers have revisited turbine traction. The physics are still attractive, the power density is still superior, but the fuel economics problem has not been solved for freight rail in a way that makes the business case survivable across a commodity cycle. There is a version of history where residual oil stayed cheap, where the 1973 shock never landed, where big blows are still pulling heavy tonnage across the Wasatch Range. In that version, diesel is the secondary technology and turbines set the standard that everything else chases. That version did not happen. What happened instead is a freight network optimized for a fuel source that won by default, operating under a horsepower ceiling set, not by what engines can do, but by what a refinery byproduct market did to one fleet in one decade. The ground no longer shakes the same way in those Nevada rail yards. The roar that carried for miles is gone. The exhaust stacks that threw heat into cold desert air are museum exhibits. The machine that built its dominance on the cheapest fuel in the world was destroyed by the day that fuel stopped being cheap. And the diesel that replaced it? It has its own ceiling, a hard one, and there is already a technology, tested in labs, proven in principle, that could shatter it entirely. The reason that technology is not already running on the main line is a story that looks remarkably familiar. Different machine, same kind of math problem,